Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Cannane. Coming up, Julia Gillard dumps one of her least popular election promises. Is hardcore internet pornography hijacking our sexuality? And Labor's power crisis, what a former senior minister says, is ruining the ALP. Our panel tonight, Jessica Brown from the Centre for Independent Studies, Peter Lewis, Director of Essential Media Communications, and in Canberra, Triple J's political reporter, John Barrington. First, the federal government's new Climate Change Committee has held its first meeting today in Canberra. The Prime Minister was there, fresh from her visit to Brussels. Now, John Barrington, Julia Gillard held a press conference this afternoon about the committee and made one big announcement at least.
Yeah, that's right. The Citizens' Assembly that we all loved before the election has it's gone. It's been dumped by this committee. It was one of those things that was criticised in the lead-up to the election campaign. And then after the election, in result, when Julia Gillard was quizzed about whether she'd continue on with the Citizens' Assembly, she said she'd leave it up to the Climate Change Committee to decide. That was quite a strategic move, and today it's been dumped.
Anyone on the panel going to mourn the loss of the Citizens' Assembly? Jessica?
I think it'll probably be the least missed policy that a Labor government's ever come out with.
Because I think some election promises are made to be broken.
John Barrington, what else did Julia Gillard say in that press conference this afternoon?
Well, I've got to say, first of all, she didn't look too jet-lagged, so that's a good thing. But she did mention a few climate change heavyweights were there, Ross Garnaut, Will Steffen, and I think it was more of a planning meeting than anything. Like they said, they're going to really push for community consensus on this, albeit without the Citizens' Assembly. And they're also going to put up a website, so I guess that could be a My Climate Change Committee to see what that's up to.
And John, Citizens' Assembly is gone, but cash for clunkers remains.
Yeah, she seemed a bit hesitant to use that term when she got asked questions about it by the media. But, yeah, she says she's going to stick on with other policies. Unfortunately, doesn't want to use the old cash for clunkers tag.
Peter Lewis, what do you think about the committee and the way it's sitting? It's sitting till the end of next year, so that's quite a long period of deliberation. I assume that there'll be no policy brought in before the next election, that they'll probably go to the next election with a certain policy.
Look, I think the big challenge for Labor is to learn from the mistakes of the last election. If you look at the 3 years of the Rudd little bit of Gillard government, it was basically a story of the Australian population and bipartisan support for an ETS. Then they went into committee for 2 years and the public got confused. What we were polling was we went from really strong support to the numbers of don't knows increasing almost on a monthly basis until the majority question you asked on any climate question was don't know was the answer. Tony Abbott came in and then made use of that confusion to create a really strong negative campaign. Labor cannot allow that to happen again. So they need to have a much more, I think, engaged process this time. It's not just boffins talking about scheme design and acronyms that no one gets. Remember, we're building a vehicle to deal with climate change. We're not debating the carburettor. So that's the challenge.
And Jessica, they're in a very difficult position, the government, aren't they? Because Julia Gillard promised that she wouldn't be bringing in a carbon tax under her leadership. And previously they were saying delay is denial. So they're stuck in a really tricky position here, aren't they?
Definitely. And especially because this is the issue on which Kevin Rudd really lost a lot of credibility. He very much won an election saying he was going to bring in an ETS. As Peter mentioned, there was bipartisan support. And then when he abandoned that, a lot of people really saw that as the turning point for Rudd. So Gillard really has to move very carefully. But I think Rudd would actually be very proud to see this sort of extra committee process. It's a very Ruddian type.
Yeah. There's a danger here for the Libs as well, Stephen, though. The short-term temptation for the Liberals will be to go broken election promise. But long-term, I would not be wanting to go to the next election as a party standing in the way of movement on climate change. There's a big, tough call for the coalition to make here too.
Well, the government's other big headache is the mining tax, and that was back in the news today. The Policy Transition Group set up to look at it, met with miners in Perth today. But Treasurer Wayne Swan is still refusing to publicly release figures which support the projected revenue of $10.5 billion.
We engage in the Treasury in discussions with companies all the time, and in particular in mining companies, and they provide to us commercial and confidence information, which is very market sensitive, and it is simply absurd to suggest that sort of information should be put into the public arena. If that occurred, there would be no contact between the Treasury and significant companies over matters of great national importance, and there wouldn't be the flow of information that is required to make good public policy.
John Barrington, last week the Senate passed a motion calling on the government to release this information about the assumptions about commodities that went into the calculation of the mining tax. Is Wayne Swan's defence any good here, given that all these people are saying release them?
Well, as he's argued, governments haven't done this in the past, but I've talked to a few people about this here at the gallery, and they say that we talk about commodities all the time, that major industry groups and organisations, corporations release these sort of forecasts all the time. And Senator Nick Xenophon is, of course, putting the pressure on Wayne Swan here because the Western Australian government has come to the fore with this sort of information before.
That's right, isn't it, Jessica? This is on the public record often, these analyses of commodities prices.
Definitely, and I think it really gives the impression of what have they got to hide? I mean, this whole process very much looked like a political fix. The government was having a lot of trouble with the mining tax. This was a fix to get them out of jail so they could go on with the election. And what we want to know now is, is this actually a good policy? They are giving the impression that really they do have something to hide by not letting these figures out.
Peter Lewis, does Labor have a credibility problem here, given that, they've been so tough on the coalition about releasing costings previously? And also, Julia Gillard said when she assumed government, bring the sunshine in. This was a new era of transparency.
I think the politics of the mining tax is going to be really interesting over the next couple of months. It was an election promise. It's being implemented. The business lobby are carrying on like sooks at the moment, trying to get a policy reversed that the Australian public voted on. I think that we're actually scrambling over the entrails here. They need to get the tax up and running so we can fund our superannuation and a whole lot of other...
Are they really being sooks? I mean, a lot of them weren't brought into the negotiation process. It was only really the big three.
Oh, the Mineral Councils of Australia was representing all the players and, at the end of the day, they can have their internals about whether or not they got the result they wanted. But,
But the junior miners say that they weren't consulted on this issue.
Well, the junior miners also are part of the group of miners that threw millions of dollars at the Labor government to derail a proposal. So they played with the big boys, I think they're being a little bit, a little bit tender now.
Oh, I don't think it's really fair to say the government won an election with a mandate on this. I mean, the election was very scrappy, and I think it's very difficult to make a line call on any of this stuff. And I think what we saw is really rushed policy made behind closed doors. I mean, this is not the way public policy should be made. This wasn't a deliberative process to come out with the best outcome. So we really do need to have a bit of scrutiny of what's actually involved now.
Peter, what about that argument that Labor's got something to hide here, that they're not releasing those assumptions on the commodities that are underpinning their argument that they can pull in $10.5 billion over 2 years on this tax?
Well, unless the other side and the independents can show where this has happened in the past, I think Wayne Swan's fair enough to go about his job and get the tax up and running, and he'll be accountable at the next budget and beyond.
OK, well, the new Gillard government is only a few weeks old, but already some senior staffers have had enough. The Daily Telegraph is reporting today that at least 20 have quit since the election. The latest resignation from the Prime Minister's own office. Now, apparently her Chief Policy Advisor, John Whelan, is heading back to a career in law. John, are you surprised that so many people would be leaving just after an election?
Well, last time I was here when there was a change of government, it was from the Howard government to the Rudd government, so a lot of people were naturally leaving given the change of government. There were a lot of boxes and cranky people emptying out their offices. I think the thing is here is that it's not just 3 years. There was 3 years and then all the lead up to get the Rudd government into power. I know there's also been people leaving, though, from the climate change portfolio. Some of Peter Garrett's media staff have moved on, and I think it's just been a really hectic last 3 years, particularly with environment and, particularly with the home insulation bungle.
Peter Lewis, you've worked for a Labor minister before. It's a tough role, isn't it?
It's an all-consuming role. It's I worked first term at the Carr government, and I got out just before the first time he went to the polls. And 2 or 3 years working in that sort of environment is a tour of duty. It's intense. You're working all day. It's a great privilege. You learn a lot of stuff. But I think it's totally understandable that people get in there, give it them all and then move on. It's not an environment where you can have a family and have a functional family. And it's, what you see is the people that stay are lifers that get addicted to it. But a lot of people move in and through to other parts of their life and carry that experience with them. I actually think it's a healthy thing.
So how do the politicians last that long? Sorry, John, I'll come to you in a second.
Because they are freaks. That's what they do. And the good thing is they've got human beings around them who come and go and bring a bit of freshness into some of these offices. So, some of my staff have gone into offices over the last few weeks. Other people that I know are moving on and they will take that experience with them for the rest of their life.
Sorry, John, you want to make a comment there?
Yeah, one of the things about the Rudd team is that they were pretty young, late 20s, early 30s. So if you look at the amount of career changes that people have these days and what young people are expected to be changing through, I suppose a lot of these people have said, I've given 3 years of my life to this, and as has been said, it was a very hectic 3 years, and maybe it's time for them to try something else. But it's got to be said too that there are people leaving on the other side, and I know there's been a resignation from Joe Hockey's office for that same reason, that it's been a very busy 3 years.
Jessica, what do you make of this 20 after you win? I mean, what would it have been like if they'd lost? I mean, they wouldn't have as many staffers for starters, but,
No.
When you win, aren't you in a good mood?
Yeah, well, look, I agree with both of these guys that it is a full-on job, and I think, on one hand, we can't read into it too much. On the other hand, though, I sort of think if you're a policy person and your passion is making a difference in policy, it's easy to get disillusioned when, before the election, we were talking about, the triumph of spin over substance, and it doesn't really seem to have changed that much. We've spent the last week debating, Tony Abbott's sleeping habits. I can understand why people...
That's because he brought it up, though, isn't it?
But I can sort of understand why people go, actually, this is not what I was in for. I want to make a difference. I want to make policy, and this is just spin. I'm out.
Could that be the case, Peter, that people get disillusioned because they get in there and they think it's about a media cycle, not about developing good policy?
Look, I think Jessica's got a point that a lot of the programs of that first term did not see the end point, and that is a frustrating thing when you're working inside the machine. I think the challenge is to keep good people, get the most out of them, but your judge of success is not how long people stay, it's what they do along the way.
John, is it something you see in the corridors of Parliament House, that burnout factor?
Well, I'd say one of the positives is that we're seeing a lot more of our ministers again now with that change of the way they do things. If you chat to people who are staying in the Prime Minister's department, they're telling me that we're going to see a lot more of the ministers now. You had that kind of central control thing with Kevin Rudd. So I believe there's a definite positive to come out of this, that maybe some of those people who got burnt out because Kevin Rudd pretty much did everything, we're now going to see other people come to the fore. Simon Crean, Penny Wong, Peter Garrett, Julia Gillard, obviously Julia Gillard, and we'll get more of a range of voices on, and the minister is important again.
Yeah, that's right. There'll be definitely a spreading of the load beyond the gang of